Sounds
So,
good.
welcome, Chuck Wild. I am so excited to have this time with you.
Oh, thank you.
Um, I'm a huge fan of your music, Liquid Mind music. I have been talking about your music. I still can't even believe there's a person behind this,
I
because
can't either. That's
I always thought it was a band, but it's you. You have been making this extraordinary music for how long?
oh, 37 years. Not publicly. It was really private early on, just giving away cassettes in the 1980s. Yes.
Well, let's talk about what brought you to making this music. Um,
Um, Gosh, okay.
yeah.
Well, it's quite a story, I have to say. In 19, let's see, starting around 1984, I was in the band Missing Persons from 1980 to 1984. We were a pop band touring all over the world. It was a lot of fun. But around 1984, I started, when I left the band, I started writing songs. And at the same time, I started noticing that a lot of my friends were getting sick, were getting ill with AIDS. And we didn't know what it was back then, but we soon learned. Um, and at the same time, my career was getting busier and busier. I got signed to Lorimar Telepictures, which was eventually bought by Warner Brothers because Lorimar had more TV than Warner Brothers did. So Warner Brothers bought them. And as part of getting signed to them as a songwriter, they said, "Hey, would you like to score some music?" I said, "Sure, why not?" I had no idea what I was talking about, but I got signed on to the Max Headroom, an Emmy-winning TV series with a wonderful co-composer by the name of Michael Honig, who was from the band Tangerine Dream, and which was a big synth band a long time ago. So we started working on Max Headroom, and very soon the show got incredibly behind schedule to the point that we had 3 days to write, mix, record, and finish 43 minutes of music every 3 days. That's like doing an album every 3 days.
Oh my
And the
gosh.
only way to do that was for me to stay up really late. And basically, I ended up sleeping in Michael's wife had an art studio there in the building that they were in. And so I would go to the art studio and sleep for about 4 hours a night. So for 3 months, I was sleep deprived. And fortunately for me, anyway, the show was canceled. I hate to see it canceled because it was a great show. But the when the show was canceled, um, this was about a week before that. We were in what's called a spotting session, and that's where you go in, you watch the footage, and then the director or the producer will say, "We want some music here and there," and we're all making notes and stuff. But I had been noticing that I was having a little trouble breathing, and my heart rate was always kind of fast. I didn't know what it was or why, but we were in this spotting session, and I started having um, like a lot of trouble breathing, and I was going. The producer, a wonderful fellow by the name of Peter Wag, who was one of the inventors of Max Headroom. Peter said, "Come on, there's not time for an ambulance." He threw me in his Porsche, drove me at 100 miles an hour down. Don't tell the police. Down some private streets in Hollywood. Took me to an urgent
Mm.
care, and they immediately rushed me in and did all these tests on me. And I started feeling a little better as I was just laying there on the gurney or whatever they call it. And the doctor came over to me and he said, "The good news is your heart is fine." there's nothing wrong with your heart. We did all these tests. You're just fine. You're having what's called an anxiety attack. And I went, what? What is an anxiety attack? I've never even heard of that before. And he
Mm.
said, your nervous system is responding to, you know, too much adrenaline, cortisol, whatever. There are different medical reasons for it. And at that point in time, he did something that I never forgot the rest of my life. He held up two pieces of paper. On one piece of paper was a prescription, I think it was Xanax or something like that. Anyway, he on the other piece of paper were meditation instructions. He said, Chuck, both of these, in my opinion, work equally as well. And he said, try one, try the other, do what you like. And I asked the doctor about that about 2 or 3 years later. I went over there for a vaccination or something. He said, I didn't say that. Of course, he can't medically say that he's recommending something over medication. So I tried the medication for about 24 hours and I could not stand the way I felt sleepy all the time. And that's not my personality. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try meditation. And I called a friend of mine, another composer by the name of Jeff Kingfisher. I think he may go by the name, oops, my chair just went down.
Oh, so the Xanax was making you sleepy.
Sleepy, right.
Yeah, not the
Right.
meditation.
No,
Okay.
no, I hadn't done
Okay.
this. I hadn't done the meditation yet. So I didn't know how to meditate. And there were
Mhm.
instructions on there, and it said very simply, breathe in, count the number one silently, breathe out. Breathe in, count the number two, breathe out. And I did that and it helped a little bit. I can't say that I found, that I felt healed yet. It helped for about 5 minutes, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I called my friend Jeff Kingfisher and I said, Jeff, do you know how to meditate? Because I thought he did it. He said, sure, I meditate all the time. He said, I would suggest that you go see a counselor friend of mine. And he said, you might want to consider some acupuncture too. He said, there's a really great Taoist master, Master Ni, and he has two sons, Mao Xing Ni and Dao Xing Ni, and they are 38th generation Chinese healers. And I'm like,
Wow.
too much information, but I'll make an appointment. But right around then, my anxiety got so bad, I became what's called agoraphobic.
Hmm.
And agoraphobia is where you have a fear of leaving your home. And I
Yes.
wouldn't leave my home. And at that point in time, I made an appointment with that counselor. Susan was her name. And my assistant drove me there, very nervous, sweating. He dropped me off. He said,
Mhm.
just walk in there, that's the address, the place. And I went in and we talked for about an hour. And she said, Chuck, you're a composer. How about if you go home and write the kind of music that represents the way you'd like to feel? Not the
Mm.
way you feel, but the way you'd like to feel, relaxed. And I said, well, I can try, but I don't know what that would be. And she said, and I don't want you to come back to see me until you can bring me a cassette. I still have a few of them laying around. A cassette with a sample of that kind of music. And I went home and it took me a long time to come up with that because everything that I wrote was really fast. I realized that I needed to stop drinking coffee. I had my last coffee in January of 1988, no caffeine whatsoever. And not to my knowledge anyway. I'm kind of allergic to chocolate anyway, so I'm used to not having that. And that was what led to the first Liquid Mind piece. I eventually went back to her and I made a piece that's called 0 Degrees Zero, and it is out on the streaming services. It's in my first of 19 albums, and that represents the way I felt. Zero, latitude, longitude, whatever. It's kind of a bad, comparison, but I just felt
No.
incredibly zero at the time. And it took me a long time. I got into acupuncture 5 days a week. I took Chinese herbs for 1 year. My parents were really worried about me. And I said, no, I'm fine. I got it handled. Don't you want to come to Kansas City? And no, I'm going to stay here. My friends are helping me and I'm going to hang here. I got in a bunch of support groups. I got into therapy, which I've done off and on ever since then, 35 years.
Mm.
Not in therapy at the moment, but I've seen counselors for years and years, and some really great people that help me grow and learn the underlying cause of why would you work 20 hours a day? You know,
Oh, I have people listening that need to hear that.
I see.
Why would you work
Well,
20 hours a day? Yeah.
and I'm a little better than that now. I can't say I'm healed, so to speak. So
Your
that's how
music,
Max
your
Headroom started.
your
Max Headroom,
music
geez,
is
Liquid Mind.
your music is so healing, Chuck.
Thank you.
It's
I
I'm a therapist and I have been recommending it to clients who have anxiety or have high levels of stress or who are just beginning to learn to meditate. I always say, well, put on Liquid Mind and just listen and kind of see where it takes you. And the truth is that meditation doesn't last very long unless you build up a practice and you get this
right.
buffer in your brain. But your music is kind of an instant buffer. A few years ago, I was in a really terrible accident and I was in a hospital for 3 weeks.
Oh gosh, sorry.
And I had your music on 24 hours a day for the 3 weeks I was in the hospital. It helped me sleep. I was counteracting the vibe of the hospital, with all the announcements and the lights and the noise. And pretty soon, all the nurses were hanging out in my room because they said, I don't know, this room feels so calm. What's going on in here? And the
That's funny.
administrators came down to my room and they were like, "What what's going on that the nurses are hanging out in your room?" And I said, "It's the music. It's Liquid Mind music." It
Wow.
I'm like, "You should pipe it in all over the hospital," which brings me to ask you, what has surprised you about the impact of your music?
Um, the number of different ways that the music is used. It's used in so many ways. I don't know if you know a music therapist by the name of Barbara Else.
Mm-mm.
Barb was,
I'm not actually a music therapist. I'm
ah,
just a regular therapist.
I
Yeah.
see, right.
Okay.
I and so Barb is a certified music therapist, which means pretty much most of them have master's degrees
Hmm.
in music therapy, and they study. And one of the first things I did was I started mailing out free CDs. It was CD first. It was cassettes, but then it was CDs in the mid 90s. And I literally have mailed thousands and thousands of CDs. And I will target them towards different areas. Like somebody used to, like, it used to be letters back then when I started out. So I'd go open the mail, there'd be 20 letters. Somebody would say, my animals all fall asleep. And I'd go, ah, order some CDs, AJ. Here's my assistant at the time. I say, order some CDs. We're going to do a mailing to veterinarians, to veterinary facilities. So I would do that. Then I'd get another one from a gal who I'm still in touch with online who had cancer, and she wasn't expected to do that well, and she listened to my music in chemo and all the time, and now she's, my music didn't do it. I'm sure it's the chemo, but it helped her retain a state of mind and the possibility of being healed, which she is now. And then I got another one from an expectant mother, and she said, I'm playing it in my expectant mother's support group. So I sent it to all the maternity wards to send out all these CDs. I didn't know how to do it. So
Wow.
it was all the different ones. I heard from the head of drug rehab in the Pennsylvania prison system, and he said they call your music liquid heroin, or sorry, no, sorry, something musical heroin. Sorry, they call your
Wow.
music musical heroin. He said it helps them all get sober. He said it's the first thing I do when they're working, in rehab, when they come to prison and they're addicted. Um, so I just kept hearing from people over and over, and
Now,
I
this is
yeah
before any brainwave research was out
that
around music and brainwaves, or were
I
you
think there
tuned
was
into
some
that?
research and I looked into it, but I did
Uh-huh.
not do that. Going back to Barb Ells, the music therapist, she got a copy of it. She reached out to me and said, you need to go to the American Music Therapy Association annual convention. And so I started doing that. I met the president of the American Music Therapy Association at the time, Dr. Alicia Clare, who's a professor at the university. I'm not sure if she still is, but the University of Kansas, where I went to college. So we really connected. I started creating gait training music for people who have strokes. It's a music that has a very loud click, and the brain automatically will cause your legs to move. It's the craziest thing in the world called gait, GAIT, gait training. And so they started turning me on to all the research regarding music. And some of it was for brainwave and so forth. I tried that and did not like it. It actually did not relax me personally. But what I did look into was the fact that when we are in our mom's womb, we don't hear high end, we don't hear treble. We hear just the, everything is muffly, and sounds, we hear the low end. And so research was done determining that music with a strong low frequency is naturally healing. And I grew up playing an organ
Oh
in a
my
church,
gosh.
and
Wait, hold the phone a sec.
yeah,
Everyone is going to take a breath on that. Wow.
low music with a low end, um, we just relate to it. We go, oh, you
Mm.
know, no big deal. I'm not talking about a loud bass like when I was in a rock band, but I'm just talking about a low, soothing. And as soon as I discovered that, I remembered playing organ in church when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. Actually, when I was 4 years old, I was crippled. I had something called Perthes hip, where I had to stay off my feet for 2 years, if you can imagine a 4-year-old. But my the gal that took care of me, her name's Edna Amos. I'll never forget Edna. She would carry me down to the piano every day and set me in front of the piano and teach me how to play. And by the time I could walk, I guess when I was 5, I had a brace and I started singing in choirs. And then I learned what a pipe organ was. And I'm like, ah, it has 5 keyboards and I love the piano only has one keyboard. I want one of these. And I said to my mom, can you show me the organ? And the organist said, I'll let him sit here next to me. And that started my love for playing organ. And by the time I was about 10 or 12 years old, she actually let me play a couple of things in church. When I was a teenager, I played for the youth services, and I would always play this meditational music where she told me, Gladys Combs is her name, and Gladys said, just hold chords and move really slowly. Think about your musical training. I was taking piano lessons by then. And she said, just hold one note and then find another chord that has that note in it. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And
Mm.
she said, that's great. And do this during the meditation part. There's a meditation in every service. So that was kind of how I came to the sound. I didn't want any rhythm whatsoever because that attracts attention. I learned about um, that music, there's 2 types of music, stimulative and sedative music. And sedative music has nothing that attracts attention. It's meant to sedate the brain, to put you to sleep. And that can be piano music for some people. It can even be guitar music for some people. But it depends on how it's played and how smooth it is. So I chose to use synthesizers. And I just tried to smooth the music as much as I could. And that's how musically Liquid Mind was born. And I just, like I was saying, I heard back from so many people so
It's
much.
fascinating, Chuck, to hear how many stepping stones there were in your life that built
Right.
this repertoire in you
It's true.
to be able to express it, to be
It's
able
true.
to deliver 19 albums and share it really around the world with people to help them after it helped you. But you were also putting together pieces from when you were very young and like you were in some ways not needing research out there because you had been kind of born intuitively studying and learning this all along and drawn to this.
Yes, I have to say, it is kind of odd looking back, and I think would I've even gotten in music if I hadn't have had that hip problem? And it was completely healed by the time I was 8. But still, I did, uh, I had a best friend who had the same thing. We both had wheelchairs when we were in kindergarten, or we switched from
Mm.
wheelchair to brace, I think. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's amazing how things work out.
I
And
looked on your site and noticed that you seem to have an interest in PTSD. Is that true?
yes, that has to do with um, I served in the Navy during Vietnam. And interestingly, I was never nervous for 1 second. When you're 22 years old, you think you are immortal, basically, and nothing is going to get you. Um, but I did see people having problems. And some of the people that I started hearing from after I made friends with music therapists were music therapists, and most of them work in hospitals, by the way. They take private clients, some of them, but most of them work in hospitals. And I kept hearing from this one gal in Waco, Texas, at the Veterans Hospital, and she said, "This is really helping the veterans with PTSD." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Post-traumatic stress, I think something." I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
Um, and
Disorder. Mm-hmm.
disorder. Thank you. And so I hopped on a plane and went down there and met with her. And I took a whole box of CDs with me, of course, put it on the plane and said, "Here you go." And she said, I said, "I want you to give them," it was like 50 CDs or something. I said, "How many patients do you have?" She said, 40. So um,
Wow.
that's how, that's how I became particularly interested in PTSD. And I've gotten, um, it's interesting you mentioned being in the hospital. I've heard from two other people that listened 24 hours a day. One fella was in a head-on collision. A truck hit his car, and he was in the hospital for 1 year. And
Mm.
he's now fine, but he told me he listened to my music 24 hours a day while he was in the hospital. And it just helped him enormously. He became an artist and a photographer and has sent me some images that are in my house now. It's a wonderful thing.
Oh
Um,
my gosh,
when
Chuck,
when
you've
the
made
yeah,
so many connections to people who are hurting and who are working on healing. And you've made this incredible connection with your music to healing without really kind of intending to, other than to do what you thought was
for
soothing.
me, it was just to heal me. But it was also for my friends who were dying of AIDS and friends in hospice. The very first cassettes that I made, we
Mm.
made three or four hundred, 300 or 400, and my assistant and I took them around to hospices and to everybody I knew and to the support groups, and the music didn't really wasn't commercially released till 1994. I started in 1988. 88 for myself, 89 as I became able to, I was okay with leaving the house. I still didn't have a name for it, by the way. One of my
Mm.
counselors, not the one who told me don't come back until you have music, but this one said, "Chuck, you need to leave your house." He said, "I don't want you to come back till you've spent the night down on Laguna Beach." I'm like, "I don't know if I can do that. I've managed to make it across town to where, for the therapy session." And I said, "Okay, I'll think about it." And about 2 weeks later, I guess, I told my assistant, I said, "I'm going to try and drive, like stay by the phone, please, just in case." I'm like freaked out. And I drove very carefully down Laguna Beach. I
Mm.
rented a room. And the first thing I did was uh, I went and sat on the rocks by the ocean. And the sound of the ocean relaxed me. It was the first time I just went, I feel normal. I actually felt normal. And that made me realize that it's not just slow music, but something about the ocean. And I've always had a little bit of sound, a little bit of pink noise, not necessarily pink noise, but sounds with pink noise. And some albums I did put noise in just to have that kind of vibe. So the slowness, um, but
Mm.
that's where I went one day when I stayed down there for several days, and I just went, it's the sound of the liquid that is relaxing my mind. And that's how the Liquid Mind name came to be.
Oh my gosh, I'm like
So,
falling off the chair. I love the sound of the water.
yes, and that
I,
that really was that gave me the key to be able to write other music and more Liquid Mind basically. I had just kind of experimented with it, but I didn't understand how to do it, and it really was the sound of the ocean. Um, so yeah,
I
always
am,
grateful for that.
if I wasn't like your biggest fan before we started talking, I'm an even bigger fan now because I'm really getting, Chuck, how much you invented this as you went along and how intuitive this music was for you. Like how you were noticing things and putting them together, and how you were really working from the inside out. And even though you were struggling at times with anxiety and agoraphobia and loss and grief, you
Yes.
were somehow using those experiences to say, and what helps? And how can music be part of that? And, you know, you had some sort of way to use your spiritual light to then share it with others, which is an incredible thing to actually listen to, Chuck, to hear this story. Because, I guess I want to ask you, you've met a lot of people along the way at this point. Do you think everyone has kind of these sorts of gifts and abilities inside?
I think everyone does. I absolutely believe that every person is born with a lot of gifts, and we make decisions along the way. And others, our parents, sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. Uh, and I think we make decisions along the way to develop certain gifts. Before all this, I was a pop songwriter. That's what I did. I was a keyboard player, and then I wanted to write songs and asked everybody I knew to write songs with me, and I developed that. And fortunately, I had a number one song in Europe that paid my bills for a few years. and and that process introduced me to Michael Jackson, who I worked with for 4 years. And the money I made with Michael paid for me to create Liquid Mind and to start my record label. So, the decision to get into music and then into rock and roll and then into pop music and then Michael Jackson working for Michael and so forth, that all kind of adds up. I don't know. It's an interesting story about meditation, actually. The second producer of Missing Persons was a five-time Grammy-winning producer who produced Michael Jackson. His name was Bruce Swedien, the late Bruce Swedien. He was my mentor, and he knew what I was doing, and he always encouraged me because I said, Bruce, I've sent it out to 40 labels and they all turn it down. They're telling me to add drums and guitar, and they would sign me in a minute, but they don't get
Oh my
they don't get that. It's true. But Bruce said, you've got something, Chuck. Stick with that. And uh,
Wow.
that was like, but I didn't have the money. I did not have the money to start it. And I met with a friend of mine named Suzanne Doucet, and she was a consultant. And Suzanne said, you're going to need like $150,000. Today, you can release music for zero. It's free. You do it at home in your computer. But I had to have like $200,000 worth of equipment, not to mention you have to go to all the conventions, you have to manufacture CDs. It was a different world. So I needed money. And I mentioned that I was talking to these Taoist masters, and they taught me how to do a color meditation. And I was sitting in the living room meditating on the colors of the spectrum, and then I just sort of chilled out, and the thought was in my mind, I know I can come up with all the money I need to bring this music to every person in the world that can benefit from it. And that was the affirmation that I was saying during the day as well. And I sat there and I said, I'm going to get that money. I just know I am. And the phone rang, and it was Bruce. And he said, Chuck, what are you doing? And something made me say, always before I told Bruce I'm insanely busy. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But this time I said, I'm working with you, Bruce. What are you doing? And he said, great. I'm working with the glove the glove was the nickname for Michael Jackson. I said, cool. What do you want me to do? And he said, Michael wants you to make sounds. He knows that you do programming. He listened to your sounds in Max Headroom. He knows about the synths that you use. He wants you to make sounds. And I said, great. I need a synclavier to do that. It was a $250,000 musical instrument. And he said, it'll be there tomorrow. He said, I know Martin Royer, who's like the synclavier king, and he will rent one of them to you, and we'll pay for it, and he'll come over and show you how to work it. I had already used it a little bit on Max Headroom, but it's interesting. I made exactly $150,000 over those 4 years, which was a lot of money for me. Back then, that's a lot of money in the early 90s.
But just what a
And
story of manifesting and about,
yeah,
again, over and over, this obvious spiritual connection that you have with this mission and this music. I mean, it's just been your life mission to get this out into the world. And that when we are driven by a purpose, I think that can serve so many people. It
mhm,
amazes me how the obstacles are moved out of the way. And your story is another one of those stories. It's like there's just something larger at work and felt and connected. And suddenly, the thing, when we tell ourselves that that's not going to be an obstacle, that's not going to be the obstacle. And I loved hearing that story. I don't know if you know that many years ago I started a youth shelter. And to get the money, I had no idea how I was going to get the money for
mm,
that either. And I got the chance to ask a service club for money. And so they were in a bingo parlor, and bingo is being called out and bingo numbers. And I'm telling them my idea. And they're all old men running this club. And they ask me questions about, like, what's my budget? And, how many staff will I need? And what's the licensing? And I'm 29 years old. I know nothing. And I'm like, I have no
wow,
idea. I don't know how we're going to do any of that. We'll figure it out when we get there. And I leave realizing I failed. And they called the next day and said, we'll buy you a house to run a shelter. Any house in town, go shopping.
wow,
So
that's
I
awesome.
understand
Yeah.
your story at a very deep level, Chuck. When you just tell yourself something has to be done here and I need this equipment and it's going to cost more money than I ever had, and then suddenly the universe just drops it for you and goes, here you go. And by the way, you'll be working on the glove and you'll be doing this and you'll have money coming in and you'll be able to make your music. It's like, there's a purpose bigger than you, and you have truly served that mission. That is what touched me so much when I looked at your website. I've never looked at your website. I've just been listening to your music for, like, I don't know, 25, 30 years,
Mm,
a long time. It plays all the time in my office in between clients. They leave, and when they walk in, they hear it going
wow.
because
Well,
that's what I
I'm
do to
glad it
sort of,
helps.
I call it my ear bath,
Mm,
to just sort of, I don't know, soothe me in between and hopefully soothe my clients. And I always recommend it. But then I got on your website for the very first time and I was so touched by the way you have made a difference with your music, the way you have been so intentional about getting it out. But I had no idea that it was so internal for you as well.
yes.
And
Really, without the struggle, I wouldn't have gotten there, I guess. Um,
oh, that is a beautiful line. Can everybody hear that for a minute again?
with
Without,
without the struggle, I would not have gotten there.
Mhm.
And the support I got, without the support, I would not have gotten there either. I had support of family, I had support of friends, I had support of the doctors Moushing and Dowshing and my friend Jeff Kingfisher and so many other people, the people that worked for me, the doctors that I saw.
They're like
Yeah,
angels that show
yeah.
up in our life. That's how I felt about the people in the bingo hall. Um, Suddenly, like these spiritual angels show up in our lives and they help us. They help us
So,
get the thing going
yes.
that we probably couldn't have done without their input, without their teaching, without their mentoring, without their pushing, without their support. And we realize there's like a force behind us pushing us into where we need to go.
We have to be willing to ask for help. I learned that
Mhm.
early on, and that was hard for me. I'm a Navy officer. I'm whatever. Uh, you know, but learning to ask for help, it's a great thing. I think I learned that mostly in support groups,
Mm,
where we would just talk about that all the time. Living in Hollywood, I had uh, friends die of drug overdoses. So I started going to Al-Anon family groups, which was very helpful to me. That's for family and friends um, of people who have problems with drugs or alcohol. And I'd say in Hollywood, everybody I knew fell into that category, not the problem category, but having friends, people we worked with and stuff.
yeah,
And
especially in the industries you've been in.
yeah, it back then it was a very tough industry. It's different now. The world is different now. Um, Production is different. Well, I don't know. I'm not doing it at the moment. So I moved away from Hollywood 10 years ago and just I had had enough of
You
the
certainly
of the
have.
constant work. So yes, I'm incredibly grateful to so many people that helped and coming from expected and unexpected places.
I
And
just so appreciate getting to hear your story, Chuck. I am very moved by this,
well, thank you.
by the way you have connected to people in support groups and in therapy and in your own life, and then reached out to people who you knew could benefit from the music that you were creating and tried to get as much of it into their hands as you could in the places that would matter the most. And I hope people listening are thinking about their own lives and places where they want to see this music go to just kind of bring a sense of calm. I mean, everyone is going through a lot of stress and challenge in these times, and I feel like your music is needed even more so now. Um,
My most recent mailing of CDs, I still made CDs. I don't know if I'll continue to do that. We're making cards now with the QR code to download, but my most recent mailing was to every member of the United States Congress, every US senator, all 50 governors, 100 senators, 50 governors, and the 9 members of the Supreme Court. I did this a couple of years ago, and I actually heard back from a bunch of governors. I didn't hear back from any of the representatives or senators. I heard back a couple of senators. I did hear back from 2 Supreme Court justices. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote me a note, said thank you for the relaxing music, and I think his name was Anton Kennedy. He may have, I don't know whether he's still with us, but and he sent me a note. I always remember it said, I listened to your music all weekend. It helped set me up
oh
for, the
my
week. So
gosh.
I felt like,
Oh,
you never know. I just thought probably most people are just going to throw away the CDs. But if a few important people or just regular people, it's not about being important, it's about being regular. if somebody who needs the music, that's that affirmation. I say, I have everything I need to bring my music to every person in the world that can benefit from it. And I probably said that 1,000 times, thousands of times. I
Wow.
say that at least every day. Um,
Well, thank you so much. And
so
I actually feel this deeper sense of calm knowing that you sent it to the Supreme Court, that you sent it to every member of Congress. There's something about hearing you say that that just makes me feel like there's hope, because that's such a hopeful thing to do. And your music really conveys a message of we all need to slow down and we need to think more carefully
right.
about our actions. And your music really does convey that. Slow down, be more thoughtful, be kind, be more
Mm,
loving. Your music really creates more than just a sense of peace. I think it's also a sense of love. And I just want to thank you for that. Thank
sure.
you for
That's
putting such compassion in the world. And thank you for putting such compassionate music in the world for all of us.
sure.
Thank you.
That's you're most welcome. That's the focus of the new album. It's called In the Love, and it's in the love. And the purpose of it, the focus is that no one in the world should ever be deprived of love. Because when we help someone else, it, in 12 step, they call it being of service. When you're of service to someone else, that's an exchange of love. And so if I'm feeling lonely or if I'm feeling angry or, something that's uncomfortable, yes, I need to look at the underlying causes and work on that. But in the short term, I can help someone. I can go be of service. I can,
Mm.
call a family member who maybe is feeling under the weather or going through something. And because we can all be in the love, just, no one need ever be deprived of love in their lives. And I think there are times I felt that way. And it's just, I've just learned over the years that there's no need to ever feel that way. It's okay
You
for me
know,
to feel that way, but
a friend of mine,
yeah,
Barbara Dunn Wilder, who's a
yeah,
music therapist, she brought me In the Love CD because she knows I'm such a huge fan of yours.
mm,
And as I'm listening to you, I think, on Thursdays I read with first graders, and I'm going to bring it to the class for
oh
them,
wow,
because I think we need it at all stages in life. I haven't tried that with young children, and I actually want to try that with them just to see
I do
what.
get feedback from I get feedback from like preschool kind of age, but yes, it's played in nap time
Oh
actually.
yeah,
So
yeah.
something must work. My cousins raised their kids to it every day. Before nap, they would hear it, and every night they would hear it. And I have an interesting story. Um,
A lot of kids also have trouble falling asleep. And,
hmm,
for those that are
might help.
listening to this conversation, this might be music you want to try to help your kids sleep and to help yourselves sleep.
Yes. I will say, Dr. William Dement, uh, the founder of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and one of the discoverers of RNA sleep, is that what it's called? Anyway, Dr. Dement, someone at
Yeah,
the record
REM sleep. Yeah.
REM, thank you. Um, Someone at the record label sent him a copy of my sleep album, and he actually wrote them and said, "You can quote me." He said, "This music is helpful as part of a pre-sleep routine." And that got me to thinking pre-sleep. I don't recommend people listen to it while they sleep, but they do. So many people tell me that. But I always say, it's best to listen 30 minutes before sleeping. So the science says that pre-sleep is the way to use it. And Dr. Dement, I've always been grateful. I think he's passed on a couple of years ago. He was like 90 at the time, I think. And
Wow.
I'm so grateful that he endorsed my music. And golly, just like,
Well, Chuck, it is an honor to talk to you. And
thank you.
I feel so grateful that this happened. So thank you for saying yes to
Sure.
this conversation.
Thanks to
And
Barbara Dunn for introducing me.
yes, yes, my dear friend Barbara, who knows I'm your like biggest fan. And
Wow.
I'm
Well,
so
thank you.
grateful that we had this conversation. And I will put also a link to your website and to some of
Okay.
your music so people can become introduced if they're not familiar.
Thank
But
you. My
thank
music
you
is for
so.
free. Yeah, I have every album since the very beginning. I've put every album on YouTube for those who don't have a subscription to all the streaming services. So, and I also, if you go to my website, you can download about an hour's worth of music. Just says free MP3. So there's ways. I'll give the music away to anyone that needs it. I don't care.
Oh, Chuck, thank you so much.
Sure.